That's going to be all his followers if he comes into the league. So how does he overcome that? You just don't play in the league anymore. You leave it out there that you're this great star, and every time that a starter goes down, the media is going to bring up signing Kaepernick. And I don't think he has any intention on playing football. His agent brought up I think the Panthers will sign him. Cam Newton has been the one guy in the league that does not want any type of a backup quarterback that's a threat to him. Go through and look at the names for the backup. They messed around with Derek Anderson for how many years on that team? Is he a threat at all if Cam goes out and throws 14 interceptions in the first quarter? Do you think that they're going to bring Derek Anderson in? Hell no. The backups that they had on this team that they played at the end of the year when Cam was hurt, once they got out of playoff contention, they were guys nobody even knew who they were. That's by design because Cam doesn't want anybody in there. So that's just being thrown out there because of the whole Eric Reed connection. But you look at the teams he would fit in on. Okay, he's already closed the door in Baltimore, and they have Robert Griffin III. Who else in this style of NFL is he going to go play for? You're right. They know that.
And it would have been Seattle to back up Russell Wilson, and he pissed in that pot.
But he doesn't want to go there. And even the report that came out that got blown off because it wasn't a mainstream site and ESPN didn't pick it up was that Kaepernick wants to set it up so that he gets either a huge payday from the pressure that's out there or he really doesn't want to play. And no one seems to believe that. But I have a feeling that if he's asking the AAF, a startup league that just needed to get infused with money from a NHL owner, that he knew there's no way they're going to pay him $20 million, but it becomes a story and it brings this front and center. And Eric, I actually think the league probably did the smart thing this time because we talked about what they should have done with some of these tapes that were out there, take care of it behind the scenes and destroy the tape because from a league PR standpoint, it's a bad look because now you have to deal with that for the length of that story. And then every time it happens, it gets brought back up. You pay Kaepernick off. Now it's shut down. Now that there's nothing left to be said that the league is colluding, they've settled. Whatever they had to pay is probably worth it because they've at least now have a chance to make this story, to me, it feels like to go away for a while.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about it really for the past 7 to 10 days after the settlement.
I mean, they can thank Robert Kraft for that.
Yeah, that is true. And you're right. They're a multi-billion-dollar league. Whatever millions they had to pay, it was worth it.
And what's been reported by Mike Florio and Pro Football Talk is that the number is not nearly as high as people think. That it hasn't been reported because of the agreement that's in place, but it's not the number that people are thinking. And because it was also set up that he's not necessarily he's not banned from the league. He could come back if a team wants him and he can sign a deal and play in the NFL. So they said that would even reduce it further because they're not harming his future earning potential. So I don't even think it's as much money. And look, for Kaepernick, he's going to have to go out and spend all this lawyer fees. He's going to have to fight the league. They're going to have to prove that there actually was collusion. He had a chance of not getting anything out of this. So he gets something, but from the NFL standpoint, they get something too. Is this story has kind of been a non-starter right now. And next year, after he's already been settled, to me, Eric, every game, every week, and into every year that goes by that Kaepernick isn't on a roster, it takes him further away from being there because he's that much longer that he's been out of the league and not playing. So for the league standpoint, I mean, at what point, we're going to be getting into 2020 soon. He's going to be 4 or 5 years removed from playing. How do you think that guy's going to be able to come back in and just pick it up? He's not going to have the same speed that he had, which was what sort of separated him back when he was in his prime in the NFL when he was actually productive. But you start to take that off.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree.
I don't think we ever see him play in the league again. And I think that's by design, Eric. I don't think he wants to play there.
Yeah, I mean, if he really wanted to play football, let's move it over to that AAF. If he really wanted to play football, he would have signed with the AAF because I think he probably at least had a chance to be one of the names and one of the prowesses in that league. And if he still had ability to play football, he really could have proven it at that point and then maybe regenerated a market for the NFL. He's proving that he doesn't want to do that. So Justin, speaking of that AAF, have you watched any of the games or what's your take on where that league is at very early in their cycle here?
I can't say that I've watched an entire game start to finish, but I've tuned in and watched pieces of them, and it's not bad. If you're on a Saturday afternoon and you're kind of bored, or even a Sunday afternoon, there's nothing else on, it's not a bad watch. The quarterback play is not where it probably needs to be for this league to really move itself forward. It's just not consistent enough yet. But for a startup league, if you're bored, I think that it's a decent enough product. They're trying to move the games along quicker, which I like. There's more openness in terms of being in viewership to the game. So there's definitely some things that I like about it. I think that it can definitely work. There is some concern about the fact that it feels like some of their investors may have been pulling out, and they needed to get, like I said earlier, they needed to get the money from Tom Dundon, who's the Carolina Hurricanes owner. That it was reported was $250 million, but it looks like that's like the max that he's going to invest in this league. And the rumors have been that they don't want to compete with the NFL. They'd actually like to build this up enough so that the NFL would actually buy them. That's why they're having investors jump in, that the NFL might pay them a pretty big sum and take over and run this league as sort of an off-season developmental type league for the NFL. So if that's really what they're trying to accomplish, that doesn't seem like it's that bad of a plan, Eric.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think the NFL is ripe for a developmental league. We've seen it in the NBA. We just talked about it. And if the NFL wants to move in that direction, you're right, though. You're going to have position players that, look, we have trouble filling 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. The drop-off is so significant when you do have a Cam Newton or an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady, or those guys go down, that you might not have a backup that's even going to hold his own weight. And so you're taking a whole other league and expecting, what do they have, 8 or 10 teams, expecting there to be good enough quarterback play where if there was, those guys would probably at least be backups in the NFL. So they've got to work some of those things out. But even, names that you've seen in the NFL, like Christian Hackenberg and others, have jumped back up and tried to see if they could rejuvenate a little bit of their career. So I think you'll get more of that as time goes on, if time goes on with this. But it's going to compete, as we said, next year with the XFL. And so I think it's just a plan to have football being in the mainstream 12 months out of the year. And, well, if you like betting or you like football, that's not really a bad thing, is it?
No, and you've been able to bet on these games as well. So that's going to continue to help. And look, we've talked about this even when NASCAR's come up. There's so many channels out there now. You have the NFL Network, you have FS1, you've got NBC Sports, you've got CBS Sports, and then you have their cable network as well. There's all these channels that need content. So if you have a product that gets 500,000 at minimum to 2-3 million people watching it, that's significant. So what if the NFL comes in and they spend $500 million and they purchase this league? They now have a product that's got something else. Maybe they throw this in on their next TV deal, and that ups it $1 billion, $2 billion. They're going to make money on this. So I think that's what the AAF is looking at in some of their investors. Like, okay, we can put this in and maybe we get a payday at the end of this. And then the NFL, they are able to sort of dominate a time when it's more basketball driven. They're able to keep themselves in until you get to the draft. You've got this little 8-team league that goes on. Maybe there's more interest in it at that point. You've already got some good announcers doing this. It's not people you've never heard of. There's coaches that are names out there that we know. So, yeah, I think that they're on the right track at this point, that they've put good NFL people behind this thing. So it'll be interesting how this plays out. And then if the XFL comes in, they look like they want to be competition to the NFL. I don't see that with the AAF. I see that they're trying to partner with the NFL, maybe even get purchased.
So you brought up NASCAR, and we don't have a lot of time left in this episode. We're actually going a little bit long, which is because there's a lot that's happened in the last 2 weeks. But we do want to talk about NASCAR because, Justin, now we've been through the Daytona 500, and we've seen the new aero package at 1.5 miles over at Atlanta. So let's just go through initial reactions. Maybe we'll talk more next week after we see what this aero package does at Las Vegas. I think that'll tell us a lot. I had a good time watching the Atlanta race. I had a really good time watching the Daytona 500. But from your seat on the couch, what were you seeing? And do you think NASCAR is off to a good start this year?
Yeah, I think the package is going in the right direction. I liked Atlanta because there was multiple leaders of this race. It wasn't one guy out in front. I mean, we've seen at Atlanta, Kevin Harvick can dominate at this track and lead a ton of laps. And it wasn't that. There were kind of comers and goers at the front of the field. You had passes for the lead during green flag runs, that it wasn't just someone could run off and hide. I text you, the one interesting thing I thought, especially in stage 1 and 2, was the amount of cars that were able to stay on the lead lap. There were still cars into the 20s, low 20s, that were able to stay on the lead lap. Now, that kind of got into it in that final run because it's longer and there wasn't many cautions in this race. But I liked it from that standpoint, is you didn't have what we saw last year, was if somebody hit it, they could drive up almost to the top 10 in terms of lapping cars in one stage if there wasn't a caution. And I think that really kills races because it limits the number of drivers that are actually up front, and guys are then having to use pit strategy and whatnot to sort of get out of sequence to get back on the lead lap. So I thought the fact that you had multiple different leaders of this race, more cars stand on the lead lap. You had some names of some new young guys. You had Hemrick up there. You had Ryan Preece up there till I guess he was texting or something, and he ran into a car that was directly in front of him. I'm not sure what happened there, but I like the fact you had some different names in the top 10 throughout this race. And then at the end, Eric, I think if you're really a fan of racing, you got what you wanted to see at the end. You had a car that was faster, that was second place running down the leader, and he made a run at him, and he just basically ran out of laps, but it wasn't one guy running off and hiding. So I like the fact that NASCAR has fixed that. I didn't feel like through that race, I don't know about you, but I didn't feel bored watching that race.
Totally agree. And that was going to be the main question I would have had for you is, depending on what your assessment was, that race, you brought it up, it really had no cautions for incident. I mean, there was a couple of minor things, but there was no big wrecks or big melees that, they try to pump up and get viewership from everybody who likes to watch the wrecks. I don't mind the wrecks, but I personally have been a race fan for a couple of decades because I love to watch guys race. I like to drive cars. I like to drive my car fast. I like to do those types of things, and I like to watch those types of things. So for me, the reason that NASCAR has been on such a decline the past 5 to 10 years is because with all of these mile and a halves, and then adding in Kentucky and Chicagoland and Auto Club Speedway out in California and Texas and all these, you're just seeing more and more races where, like you said, a guy can, if he's out in clean air, which means he's in the front, he doesn't have any turbulence on his front bumper, so he's got that clean air, he can just run and hide. Everyone follows the leader for the rest of the race, and it is incredibly boring.
Yeah.
This race to me was not boring. I think that's because the restarts were fantastic. You had guys that could take any line on the track they wanted. First time I think I've ever seen 4 wide at Atlanta. Now, granted, they can't do that for 400 miles. There would be huge wrecks if they did that. But with fresh tires and the aero package, they could run 2 and 3 and 4 different lines for about 10 laps, and then they needed to separate out. But then they could catch up, they could pass because, Justin, they could run on the bottom side, they could run in the middle, they could run on the top side. Martin Truex Jr. was going to catch Keselowski if he just had another 2 laps, and he probably could have gotten around him because there wasn't just one groove on the racetrack due to the aero package. He could have drove his car up, down, middle, whatever needed to be done to get around him, and you were seeing that all the way back through the field. And to your point, it was even mattering for 12th and 13th place or 19th and 20th place because they were passing each other due to the fact that they weren't 3 laps down, and it mattered. The positions on the track mattered. So it was probably the most exciting race I've watched outside of, let's say, the Roval or those types of things, where it wasn't exciting because there was drama from a wreck or, guys mad at each other or whatever. It was exciting for the fact that there was racing all day long. So I'm excited for this weekend in Vegas, and I think there's even a few more tweaks they're talking about, but I think they're in the right direction with this. It's going to be interesting to see how worn out these guys get, because the one thing I was thinking is, lots of people think NASCAR is not a sport and it's just turning left or whatever. I totally disagree, and I have for a long time. But I don't think, Justin, that you can keep those guys running 2 and 3 and 4 wide for very long because it's just mentally and physically draining. So my concern is if this package is so good and they're running in that pack on a shorter track for 300, 400 miles, what would be the downside of that? And I think the downside would be just absolute mental and physical exhaustion that will lead to mistakes.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever get to that point with this package, and just because eventually the cars, I think they want to get close to what the truck series is, where the field stays more compact for a little bit longer after the restarts, 10, 12, 15 laps, and then they start to spread out and you get a little bit more side-by-side racing, but you're not going to have the 3 and 4 wide stuff for very long. And even we saw that really for like the first 2 to 3 laps, and then they were just more side-by-side. I mean, the restarts were so good, I wanted to see more of them. You just didn't need huge crashes in terms of a race like that. It was just fun to see guys jockeying for position, and the fact that guys could get out in front and they could run back to the front of the field if they were up front. Now, the one thing I did see, if guys got trapped, like Almirola led early in that race, he got the pit road penalty, and it felt like he could never get up past like 7th in that race. Larson had the fastest car, it felt like, early in that race, and up through the midpoint of it, he got his pit road penalty. He really couldn't get back up. So I think that's the one thing I see that I didn't like from the fact that if you had a really good car, you still got trapped in the back. That's the one thing, and maybe that this week will change. with what they're going to do with the front ends of these cars. So that's just the one piece